if you had to choose between honor and love, which would you choose? I've asked myself that same question more times than I care to admit, and every time it cuts a little deeper. See, out here in the wild country, things ain't painted in black and white. Life is raw, windswept and dust-covered, and love don't come easy. Especially not the kind that goes against everything you were raised to believe. That's the kind that burns slow, deep, and dangerous. Let me tell you a story. It starts in a small town tucked between the jagged hills of New Mexico Territory, back when the land was young and law was just a badge pinned to a man's chest. The place was called Bitter Creek. Funny name for a town with so many sweet lies bubbling underneath its surface. The mornings smelled like dust and horses. The nights carried the sound of coyotes and creaking wood. Folks lived hard and held on to their pride like it was all they had, because sometimes it was. The sheriff of Bitter Creek was John Avery, a man carved from stone, with a voice that could freeze the saloon mid-song and eyes like dry flint. His word was law, and nobody dared challenge it. Not the ranchers, not the gamblers, not the drifters that passed through looking to stir trouble. He kept the peace with a steady hand and a quick draw, but for all his grit, there was one soft spot in that man, and her name was Clara. Clara Avery, his only child, his pride, his blood, and his final link to the woman he lost to fever one long, bitter winter. Clara had the kind of beauty the desert couldn't touch. Hair the color of roasted chestnut, eyes like storm clouds before a summer rain. But it wasn't just her face that stopped you in your tracks. It was the way she carried herself. Straight-backed, chin-high, like a woman who didn't know how to be tamed. She rode better than most men in town, shot straighter than half the deputies, and when she spoke, even the preacher paused to listen. But she was lonely, not the kind of lonely you fix with Sunday socials or the company of town boys who brought her flowers and empty promises. No, Clara carried a different kind of ache, a hunger in her bones, a longing for something wild, something true. Maybe she got it from her mother, or maybe from the land itself. Sheriff Avery didn't see it, or maybe he chose not to. He raised her with rules like fence posts, tight, tall, and unmovable. He believed that honor came first, that reputation mattered more than feeling, that love, if it ever showed its face, ought to come clean and proper, not crawling through back doors under cover of night. But love doesn't ask permission, not in Bitter Creek, and especially not when it comes in the form of a stranger with a shadowed past and a heart full of ghosts. It was late spring when the outlaw came riding into town. Dust clung to him like a second skin. He had a scar across his cheekbone, a worn hat pulled low, and a rifle strapped across his back like a promise he hadn't yet kept. He said his name was Eli Ward. No one knew where he came from. No one asked. In Bitter Creek, if a man didn't ask questions, he didn't get shot. And Eli had that look in his eye, the kind that told you he'd seen too much, lost too much, and didn't flinch at the thought of dying. He took work fixing fences out on the edge of Avery land. Sheriff didn't like it, didn't trust him from the first moment, said he had the wrong kind of silence about him. But Clara, she saw something else. She said it was in the way he looked at the horses, gentle, quiet, like he understood what it meant to be trapped behind fences. She'd pass him on the ridge while out riding, their eyes meeting for just a second longer than they should have. Nothing was said, but something stirred, something ancient, dangerous. I remember that look, I've seen it before. It's the look of two people who know they've found something they're not supposed to touch. And once that spark's lit, well, you can't put it back in the dark. That was the beginning. A stolen glance, a lingering silence, the sharp pull of hearts that hadn't even said a word. Out here, in the great silence of the West, love doesn't bloom like in the cities. It doesn't come with candlelight or music or champagne. It comes in the form of dust trails, campfire smoke, and hands brushing too long over saddle leather. It comes when you're not looking, when it's too late to turn back. And it always, always comes with a cost. So I ask you again, if you had to choose between honor and love, which would you choose? Because Bitter Creek's sheriff was about to find out, and so was his daughter. If your whole life had been shaped by a man's shadow, how do you step out into your own light? Clara Avery was raised in a world where silence was strength and obedience was love. Her father didn't say, "I love you," out loud. He said it by teaching her to ride at 6, by giving her his old Colt revolver and showing her how to aim for center mass, by teaching her never to cry in public, never to flinch, and never, never to trust a man who didn't have a past. And yet, some hearts weren't meant to be fenced in, even if they were born behind one. Sheriff Avery called her his little hawk, said she had eyes sharp as razors and a will that could shame a stallion. And Clara lived to make him proud. She watched him walk the streets with that iron badge on his chest, calm as a midnight prayer, knowing that every coward and killer in Bitter Creek stepped aside when he passed. He was the law, the edge that held the wilderness at bay, and she loved him for it. But she wasn't a little girl anymore. She felt it in her bones, in her chest, in the way her breath caught when she rode too fast across the plains. She'd race the wind until her lungs burned, hoping she could outrun the silence growing inside her. That ache, that yearning, that whisper she tried to smother each night when the house fell still and the oil lamp flickered low. She was tired of being watched, of being praised like a trophy and guarded like a prisoner. Tired of the suitors who wanted her for her name, for the Avery blood, for the way her father would nod from the porch like a king granting permission. They'd bring flowers, whiskey, sometimes a book or two, thinking it made them deep. But none of them saw her, not really. And then came the stranger, the one with the dust-stained boots and the scar that looked like it had a story he wouldn't tell. Eli Ward. He didn't ask about her father. He didn't try to impress her. He just tipped his hat when she passed and looked at her like she was a person, not a prize. It started simple. A wave. A glance. Then one morning at the creek, she saw him kneeling by the water, hands cupped, eyes closed like he was praying. She should have turned back, should have left, but something held her there, and when he looked up, Lord help her, that was the moment. His eyes were quiet. Not cold, just tired. Like someone who'd been walking a long road and didn't expect kindness at the end of it. And she knew, without a word spoken, that he carried ghosts. The kind that didn't let a man sleep easy. He said her name like it was a question. Clara. Just that. No compliments, no show. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like her father's daughter. She felt like herself. But feelings like that don't come without a price, especially in a town like Bitter Creek, especially with a father like Sheriff Avery. The next day, she caught herself smiling at nothing, and it terrified her. She rode harder than ever, trying to shake it off. At dinner, her father asked if she was ill. She said she was fine. He nodded, never pressed. That was their way. But later that night, she sat at her window and watched the moon rise over the hills, wondering if Eli was awake, if he was looking at the same sky, wondering if this, whatever this was, could survive in a world built on rules and walls and names that mattered too much. Was it foolish? Was it dangerous? Yes, but love doesn't ask those questions until it's too late. Sheriff Avery had always been her compass, her anchor. But now her heart was pulling her in a direction no one could map. And every step she took toward Eli felt like a betrayal wrapped in gold. How do you choose between the man who raised you and the man who sees you? How do you carry a secret when it's the only thing that makes you feel alive? I've seen good folks torn in two by less, because the West is a place that punishes you for feeling. It breaks men who cry and buries women who love too loudly. Out here, you survive by following the rules. But Clara was born to break them, and the deeper she fell for Eli Ward, the closer she came to breaking everything her father ever built, including his heart. The first lie always comes easy. It's the second one that starts to eat at your soul. And by the time Sheriff Avery caught wind of what was happening beneath his roof, well, the fire was already lit. And fire, once set loose in the dry wind of the frontier, has a way of burning through everything. If you knew loving someone could cost them everything, would you still do it? That question don't go away easy. It sticks to your ribs like beans over an open fire. Because once you've tasted a love that's forbidden, that walks the edge of law and longing. There's no going back to safe. And Eli Ward, he was anything but safe. He rode into Bitter Creek quiet as a shadow, just another drifter looking for work, a place to sleep, maybe a name that didn't follow him. Folks like that didn't last long out here. The sheriff made sure of it. He'd see the dust on their boots and the miles in their eyes and send them packing with a look or a warning shot if needed. But Eli didn't flinch, didn't beg for mercy or brag about his past, just said he could mend fences and didn't mind sleeping in the hay. Sheriff Avery narrowed his eyes and gave him a week. That week turned into 2. By the time the month turned, Eli had patched every busted rail on the Avery ranch and fixed the hinges on the sheriff's barn door without being asked. He never raised his voice, never spoke out of turn, and kept to himself more than was natural. There was a kind of sorrow about him, like a man who'd built a home in silence and pain. But Clara, she saw through the quiet. She saw the way his hands moved with care, how he brushed the mane of her father's stallion like it was spun gold, how he turned away when other men stared too long. There was gentleness beneath that grit, something the world hadn't been able to beat out of him. Not yet, and maybe that's what drew her in. Not the mystery, not the danger, but the fact that he hadn't lost his softness, even after whatever it was that had left him scarred and wandering. They spoke the way people do when they're afraid of what might happen if they speak too loud. Short sentences, half smiles. A glance here, a question there. "Do you miss anywhere?" she asked once. He paused, eyes on the horizon. Everywhere. She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. You can hear truth like that in a man's voice. Not the kind of truth that saves you. No. The kind that damns you and still makes you want more. It wasn't long before the meetings began. By the edge of the cornfield, near the old windmill where the grass grew tall and golden. It wasn't planned. Love like that never is. One evening she found him there, sketching something on a scrap of wood. A horse, maybe, or a memory. Their eyes met, and for once neither of them looked away. He offered her the drawing, rough and unfinished. She took it like it was made of glass. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. She smiled. "Neither should you." And that was it, the kind of moment that splits a life clean in two, before and after. They never kissed, not then. They didn't have to. Some loves are spoken in silence, in stolen minutes and shadows, and the way two souls lean toward each other without meaning to. But secrets like that, they grow, they breathe, they ache to be known. And in a town like Bitter Creek, secrets have a way of getting dragged into the light. Sheriff Avery hadn't noticed yet, but others had. A ranch hand saw them talking too close. A preacher's wife said Clara was glowing more than usual. Rumors, whispers, nothing solid yet. And Eli knew. Lord, he knew. He'd seen what happened to men who crossed the line, who dared to love outside their station. And he wasn't just poor. He was a ghost with a record, maybe not in Bitter Creek, but somewhere. You could see it in the way he flinched when boots hit wood too hard, or when someone reached too fast for their belt. He didn't tell her much about his past, only that he'd been to Texas, that he'd done things he wasn't proud of, that he was tired of running. "You're not running now," she whispered once, brushing her fingers across his hand. And he looked at her like she was the first sunrise he'd ever seen. But every sunrise has its shadow, and no matter how tender his gaze, no matter how much her heart soared at the sound of his voice, Eli Ward knew one day soon he'd have to make a choice. Protect her or keep her, because in a land ruled by men like Sheriff Avery, love wasn't enough. Not if it came with secrets, not if it smelled like gunpowder and shame. So I ask you one more time, if you knew your love could destroy the one thing you cherish most, would you still reach for it? Clara did, and Eli, he was already falling. If love only lives in the dark, is it still real? That's the question Clara kept turning over in her chest like a smooth stone. Each time she met Eli under that sky, beneath the hush of stars and the silver wash of moonlight, she felt it pressing deeper. Was love still true if you had to hide it like a sin? Because by then, it wasn't just stolen glances anymore. It was something far more dangerous. They'd meet when the house was asleep, when the sheriff's boots sat still by the door, and the hound by the fire had settled into dreams. Clara would wrap her shawl around her shoulders and slip barefoot across the creaking porch, her heart thudding like a drumbeat in her ears. Every step away from that house felt like a choice, a crack widening between daughter and woman, between duty and desire. She'd find Eli waiting near the edge of the cottonwoods, where the land dipped low and the grass whispered secrets. He never said much, just looked at her like she was something sacred. And she, Lord, she couldn't help it. She looked right back. One night, she brought him a peach from the kitchen. It wasn't ripe, but he took it with both hands like she'd offered him gold. They shared it, slow, laughing at the tart bite and the juice that ran down her chin. He wiped it away with a calloused thumb, and for a moment, the whole world stopped. That was the first time he kissed her. It wasn't rushed or hungry. It was quiet, careful, like he was memorizing the shape of her, like he knew the price they'd both pay for that moment, and still leaned in anyway. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the moon drift past her pane. Her lips still tingled. Her father's snores echoed down the hall, and all she could think was, "What have I done?" Because loving Eli wasn't just a secret, it was a betrayal. Her father had enemies, real ones, men who carried grudges and bullets with his name carved into them. And here she was, wrapped up in a man she barely knew, a man who could have been one of them. But when she looked at Eli, she didn't see danger. She saw the way his hand trembled when he played with the barn cat, the way he flinched when someone raised their voice, the way he looked at her, not like property, not like a prize, but like a prayer. And still, the guilt sat heavy. There was a cost to love like this, not in words, but in silence, in the way she avoided her father's eyes across the breakfast table, in the way her voice shook when she said she was going riding alone, in the way her fingers tightened on the reins when she passed the townsfolk who had begun to whisper. One afternoon, she caught the blacksmith's wife watching her with narrowed eyes, lips pressed thin as wire. Clara smiled politely, but something cold twisted in her gut. People were starting to see, and Eli, he knew it too. They met by the river that night, the water low and soft, trickling over stone like a lullaby. She found him pacing, jaw tight. "We can't keep doing this," he said without turning. Clara didn't answer. He turned to her, eyes burning. "I ain't who you think I am." She stepped closer. "Then tell me who you are." But he didn't. He just stared at her like he wanted to, like every piece of him ached to spill the truth. But some truths, once said out loud, don't ever go back in the bottle. "I've done things," he said, voice low. "Things your father would shoot me for. And maybe he should." She reached for him. "You think I care about what he'd do?" "Yes," he said, "you do. You love him." And there it was. The wedge, the tear, the truth neither of them wanted to speak. Clara did love her father, fiercely, but her heart was no longer hers alone. It was split, half bound to blood and duty, half to a man she couldn't stop needing. And every night she chose Eli. She betrayed the man who raised her. It wasn't fair, but nothing out here ever was. Still, they kept meeting, because some loves are worth the burn, even when you know the fire's coming. They kissed under cottonwoods. They whispered promises they were too afraid to believe. And when he held her, she forgot everything. Her name, her father, the badge on the wall, the loaded rifle by the door. But reality don't stay away forever. That fall wind started to change. The nights got colder. And something in the air told them both the end was near, because no secret stays buried forever. And in a town like Bitter Creek, moonlight was never enough to hide forbidden love. So I ask you, if the only place your heart feels free is in the dark, how long before the morning takes it from you? Clara and Eli had one more night, and after that, everything changed. What would you do if the person you loved made you a liar? I think about that more than I should, because truth ain't always clean. Sometimes it's sharp and messy, and it leaves scars in places no one else can see. Clara thought she could hold both, her father's pride and Eli's heart. She believed if she was careful, if she kept her steps quiet and her face calm, the two worlds she lived in would never collide. But the West don't work like that. Not for long. It started with a letter. Sheriff Avery received it one morning just after dawn, while Clara was still pretending to sleep, with the weight of Eli's last kiss still on her lips. The letter came from over the Texas line, stained at the edges, and sealed with a mark the sheriff didn't recognize. He read it alone, standing on the porch with the rising sun behind him. Clara heard the screen door creak. She saw the way he stood still for too long, the way his jaw tightened, the way he folded the paper with slow, deliberate hands. He didn't say a word over breakfast, but that afternoon he rode into town without her, and he came back with a name on his tongue he hadn't spoken before. "Eli Ward," he said, sitting at the edge of the porch, polishing his rifle. "He's not who he says he is." Clara's heart stopped mid-beat. She kept her voice steady. "What do you mean?" The sheriff didn't look at her, just kept rubbing that cloth over the barrel like it was a prayer. "Texas law's been looking for him. Horse theft. Bank job gone south. Couple of dead men in his wake. They say he vanished 3 years ago. Till now." Clara wanted to scream. She wanted to say it wasn't true, that the man she'd held under the stars wasn't a thief or a killer. But her father wasn't asking for her opinion. He was giving her the truth as he saw it. And that truth came with a gun and a badge. "I want him gone," he said, "by week's end." That night, Clara didn't sleep. Her room felt colder, smaller. She stared at the ceiling until the moon shifted in the window, then slipped out the back door with her shawl tight around her shoulders. Eli was waiting. He always was. She found him by the old windmill, same as before. But something in him was different. His shoulders looked heavier, his eyes dimmer. He saw it in her face before she spoke. "You know," he said. Clara nodded. "I didn't kill nobody," he said. "Not that day. But I ran with the wrong men. I was scared, young. I took the money and left before the shots were fired." She stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd never look at me the same." His voice cracked just a little. "And I couldn't bear that." She reached up, touched the side of his face. "I'm looking now, Eli, and you're still the only man who ever made me feel free." He kissed her then, desperate, like he was clinging to something already lost. And in that kiss was every fear, every hope, every broken promise between them. They knew it was ending, not because the love had faded, but because the world around them was sharpening its knives. And sure enough, someone had followed Clara that night. A shadow in the brush, a crunch of dry grass, a flicker of silver under moonlight. Eli heard it first. He pulled away, eyes wide. "Run!" "What?" He grabbed her shoulders. "Go! Now!" But she didn't move. A voice rang out, low, furious. "Step away from her, Ward." "Sheriff Avery." He stepped into the clearing, rifle aimed straight at Eli's chest. His jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from granite. His eyes weren't just angry, they were wounded. Like he'd just watched everything he'd ever built fall into fire. Clara stepped between them. "Daddy, no." "Move," he said. "You don't know what he is." "I know exactly what he is," she said. "He's the man I love." The silence that followed was thick and brutal, and in it, something inside the sheriff broke. You could see it in his eyes. The betrayal, the disbelief, the heartbreak of a man who'd given everything to protect his daughter, only to lose her to the very kind of man he'd sworn to hunt down. His hands shook, but he didn't lower the rifle. Eli raised his palms slowly, voice calm. "You want to shoot me, Sheriff? I won't stop you. But don't do it in front of her. She's already paid enough for loving a man like me." The sheriff didn't speak. Not for a long time. Then, finally, he lowered the barrel. Just an inch. Just enough. "Leave," he said, voice like gravel. "Tonight. Don't come back. And if I ever see your face again—" Eli nodded. "You won't." Clara stood frozen. Tears welled, but she held them back. Her father wouldn't want them. And Eli. Eli had already seen enough sorrow. She walked with him to the edge of town where the road split toward the Badlands. No words. Just hands held tight until they had to let go. He turned one last time. "I'll love you," he said, "until this sky burns out." And then he was gone, riding toward the horizon under the bruised light of dawn. "So I ask you again, like I've asked myself 100 nights since, if loving someone means breaking your father's heart, if staying means losing yourself, if leaving is the only way to keep them safe, would you do it?" Clara did, and I reckon so would I. What if you knew the last time you saw someone, really saw them, would be the last? Would you say more? Would you hold them longer? Or would you walk away faster so the pain couldn't catch you? I think about that night more than I should. The night the road forked between what could have been and what had to be. The night love didn't die, but had to let go. Eli was gone. Dust trailing behind him like a ghost refusing to settle. Clara stood on that ridge long after his silhouette disappeared into the morning haze. The world was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind. Just the hum of her own heart cracking in her chest. When she returned to the house, the porch was empty. Her father's boots were gone, the rifle too. He didn't speak to her for 2 days. Not a glance, not a grunt, nothing. And somehow that silence cut deeper than any bullet. Clara went about her chores like her limbs were filled with lead, fed the chickens, hauled water, mended the hem of her Sunday dress with shaking fingers, knowing she'd never wear it for a wedding her father would approve of. And then, on the 3rd day, came the news. 2 men rode into town, bloodied and half-conscious, dragging with them a body they said had come out of the rocks with a gun and nothing left to lose. Said he matched the name Eli Ward. Said he was headed south, alone, fast, and outnumbered. They said he'd been ambushed, shot in the leg, crawled behind a ridge and vanished like smoke. No one could confirm if he lived, but no one could prove he didn't. Clara heard it all from the back of the general store. Her breath caught, her vision blurred. She gripped the counter so tight her knuckles turned white. She ran, out of town, across the prairie, past the cottonwoods where they used to meet. Her boots tore through brush and rock until her knees gave out, and she fell to the ground, sobbing into the dirt. Because she knew, her father had followed him. And whether he pulled the trigger or just stood by while others did, it didn't matter. Blood was blood, and betrayal was betrayal. That night, when she returned, her father sat at the kitchen table, hat in his hands, rifle leaning against the wall. He didn't look at her, didn't apologize. "I did what I had to do," he said. Clara stood in the doorway, trembling. "You did what you had to do, not what I needed." He looked up then, and for the first time in her life, she saw something fragile in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, regret. "I couldn't lose you," he said. She stepped forward, voice shaking. "You already did." And that was the last time they spoke of Eli Ward. Days passed, then weeks. Clara kept on, planted the spring garden, rode the perimeter fence every morning, smiled when people asked too many questions. But something inside her had gone still, like a river choked by winter frost. She wore her hair up now, kept her dresses plain. The fire in her eyes dimmed. The town thought she was grieving a foolish crush. Just a girl caught up in outlaw daydreams. But they didn't know what it meant to choose love over everything. They didn't know the sound of a goodbye you never wanted to give. They didn't know what it meant to live with a heart that still reached for someone who might already be buried beneath desert stone. Then, one morning, just as the sun crested over the east ridge, Clara found something wedged in the crack of the old cottonwood tree. A carving, rough, jagged, and unmistakably his. It read, "Still breathing, still yours." She pressed her fingers to the letters, and for the first time in weeks she let herself cry, not from sorrow, but from something like hope. Small, shaky, but alive. Eli had lived. He was out there, somewhere, and maybe he was still waiting. So I ask you, sitting here beside this fire, where the wind smells of dust and memory, If your love vanished into the wild to keep you safe, would you follow? If everything you were raised to believe turned against the only thing your heart ever needed, would you still choose love? Clara didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. Some goodbyes aren't endings. They're just the start of a longer road. And somewhere beyond the Badlands, Eli Ward was still riding. If you had to carry a love that no one else believed in, would you still carry it, even when it gets heavy, even when the years stack up like firewood, even when the people around you forget it ever happened? Would you still keep it alive? Clara did, long after the dust settled in Bitter Creek, long after her father grew old and gray and stopped patrolling the streets with that iron badge, long after the porch creaked more than the floorboards inside, and the garden grew wild from neglect. Time moved slow in places like that, but the memories, they stayed sharp. She'd walk the old paths they used to ride, sit beneath the cottonwoods and trace her fingers over that carved message, still breathing, still yours. The bark had aged, the lines had faded, but her belief hadn't. You could see it in the way she looked west when the wind picked up, the way her eyes scanned the horizon like they were listening for hoofbeats that never came. She never remarried, never left. She just waited. The sheriff, for his part, never spoke of Eli again. He carried his silence like a saddlebag full of guilt. I think he knew, deep down, that love ain't something you can shoot or chase off a ridge. It roots deep, like mesquite in dry land. You try to cut it down, and it only comes back stronger. Sometimes I wonder if he watched her from the porch, watched the way her fingers lingered on letters, the way she sat by the fire and stared into nothing, the way she never quite smiled the same. Maybe he realized, too late, that he didn't just lose a daughter to love. He lost her trust. But Clara, she didn't hate him. She still cared for him when his legs gave out, cooked his meals, read to him at night when his eyes grew too tired to see. Love's a strange thing like that. It survives even in the broken places. When the sheriff passed, they buried him on the edge of his land, beneath the old pine tree he'd planted the year Clara was born. She stood at his grave in black, chin high, just like he'd taught her. But her eyes drifted west again. Folks in town called her Miss Avery for years. Some pitied her, some respected her, but most just let her be. They didn't know the truth. Didn't know she still got letters once a year. No return address. Just a simple folded page tucked in the cracks of that same cottonwood tree. The handwriting was rough, the words few, but they were always the same. Still breathing, still yours. And she'd fold it up, press it to her chest, and smile like a woman who never gave up on the fire inside her. Some say she finally left one spring, packed a small bag, saddled her mare, rode off toward the setting sun without a word to anyone, left the house unlocked, the porch rocking chair still swaying, the flowers by the gate in full bloom. No note, no goodbye, just gone. They never found her, but every now and then, a rider comes through town, a weathered man with a scar across his cheek and eyes like dusk. He doesn't stay long, just buys supplies, tips his hat, and disappears again. And every time, the old-timers smile and whisper, "That's him, the outlaw with gentle eyes." So, I'll ask you one last time, as this fire burns low and the sky darkens around us, if you had to choose between honor and love, between the family that raised you and the one soul who made you feel alive, would you follow your heart into the wild? Clara Avery did, and somewhere, Beneath a different sky, she and Eli Ward are still riding. Together,